All right, let's get into it. To really understand how we can take more effective, meaningful action in our own lives, we're going to start somewhere you probably wouldn't expect: the movies. Yep, we're going to look at a pretty cool technique that filmmakers use all the time to make their scenes feel real and powerful and just believable. And it turns out this one little principle has a ton to teach us about how we live our own lives. So, in the world of filmmaking, it's called motivated lighting. And the idea is actually super simple but really powerful. Every key light you see on an actor's face should look like it's coming from a source that's actually in the scene. A window, a desk lamp, maybe a neon sign outside. It makes the world on screen feel totally natural because every light has a reason to be there. It just makes sense. So, of course, that got me thinking. What if we took that exact same idea and applied it to our own actions? What if every big step we took was motivated, justified by a really clear source, making it feel natural and totally integrated with who we are and what we want? What would that even look like? Well, to answer that, we first have to figure out why our actions so often feel the complete opposite: unmotivated, hesitant, kind of stuck. And it usually boils down to a few really common habits. And here's one of the biggest traps we all fall into: this need to wait for perfect information. We tell ourselves, I need 90%, maybe even 100% of the data before I can make a move. But what does that really get us? It gets us stuck in what they call paralysis of analysis. And while we're busy analyzing, those amazing opportunities just slip right by. The alternative? Acting when you have about 70% of the information. That lets you be fast and decisive and get on with it. But look, this hesitation isn't just about data, right? It's way more personal than that. We struggle to take up space, which is really just a fancy way of saying we struggle to honor our own needs. And this comes from all that stuff bubbling under the surface: low self-esteem, being terrified of what other people will think, perfectionism, that nagging voice of imposter syndrome. We hesitate because deep down, we feel like we just don't have the right to act. And that's the key thing to get here. Taking up space isn't about being pushy or aggressive. Nope, it's simply about giving yourself permission to exist, to have needs, and to show up as your authentic self. Honestly, it's the foundation for any truly motivated action. Okay, so how do we actually fix this? How do we create our own motivated light so we can finally start moving? Well, the very first tool is a dead simple rule for making decisions: 70%. This number comes from none other than Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. His argument? Most decisions should be made when you have about 70% of the information you wish you had. See, if you wait for 90%, you're just going to be too slow. You'll miss out. The 70% rule accepts a really important truth: no decision is final. You can always adjust and change course later on. It is so much better to make a good decision quickly than a perfect decision way too late. I can hear you asking, okay, but how do I know when I've hit 70%? Great question. The answer is you estimate. You can use time, like if you have a 10-day deadline, make the call on day 7, or you could use a checklist of what you need and just act when you've ticked off 7 out of 10 boxes. Or, just ask some trusted people for their input to round out your view. It's about being generally right, not perfectly right. So making the decision is one half of the battle. But you also have to deal with all that internal noise, that inner critic that's always screaming at you to wait, to hesitate. This is where we learn how to set up our internal practical lamps, and maybe more importantly, how to use the dimmer switch. First off, let's totally reframe what taking up space even means. I want you to think of it like a pie. You taking your rightful slice doesn't mean someone else has to go hungry. It just means you are claiming what is yours. Everyone else still gets their slice too. It is not a zero-sum game. But that's easier said than done, isn't it? What happens when that little voice in your head is just screaming that you don't deserve that slice of pie, or that you're totally gonna fail? Well, that's when you have to learn how to turn down the volume and regulate that signal. Now this right here might be one of the most powerful mindset shifts you can ever make. See, when we praise ourselves or other people for some innate trait, like being smart, we accidentally create a huge fear of failure. Because if you're smart, then messing up feels like a direct threat to your identity. But when we praise the process, the effort, the persistence, the different strategies we tried, we build resilience. It tells us that success comes from what we do, and that's something we can always control and always get better at. And you can strengthen that process-focused muscle with tiny acts of self-kindness. Seriously, 5 minutes or less. Instead of a to-do list, try making a done list at the end of the day to actually see what you accomplished. Keep a little folder of nice emails or compliments you've gotten. And just ask yourself, what would a kind friend say to me right now? These little things really do act like a dimmer switch for that harsh inner critic. All right, so we've learned how to motivate our own actions, but the final piece of this whole puzzle is learning how to motivate our ideas for other people. And to do that, we have to escape a really common mental trap. This comic from XKCD is hilarious, and it perfectly illustrates something called the curse of knowledge. You've got these geochemists who just assume that, of course, everyone knows the chemical formulas for a few basic minerals. They literally can't imagine not knowing it, so they have no idea what the average person understands. And that's really the formal definition right there. Once you know something, it becomes incredibly difficult to remember what it felt like to not know it. As experts, and hey, we're all an expert in our own ideas, we assume things are obvious when, to everyone else, they're anything but. And this brings us right back to where we started. Just like a filmmaker has to motivate a light source so a scene feels natural to the audience, we have to motivate our ideas for our audience. We have to give them the context, the why, the justification, so that our message feels natural and makes sense in their world. So how do you actually do that? Well, first, just knowing the curse exists is half the battle. Then, actively try to figure out what your audience really knows. And listen, when you're not sure, it is almost always better to over-explain than to under-explain. And for the love of everything, banish words like obvious, clear, or of course from your vocabulary. What's obvious to you is almost never obvious to someone hearing it for the very first time. So when you put it all together, an effective, well-lit life is really built on a series of motivated actions. These are actions that are justified by honoring our real needs, guided by the courage to act with 70% certainty, and powered by the self-compassion to praise the process, not just the final outcome. It's all about finding the reason, that justification, the window or the lamp, for the light that you want to shine in the world. So, my question for you is, what's one action you've been putting off, and what motivated light can you finally switch on today?